Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and today we're going to be breaking the ice as we head to SeaWorld Orlando for our full in-depth review of Icebreaker. Icebreaker is SeaWorld Orlando's newest coaster in 2022, as it opened on February 18th officially after a brief period of pass holder previews. This multi-launch coaster built by Premier Rides features 4 launches, 2 backwards and 2 forwards, as well as a top speed of 52 miles an hour. Now, some other noteworthy stats about this attraction is the fact that it does have a top height of 93 feet, including a 100-degree backwards stall, which is officially the steepest drop in all of Florida, as well as a track length of 1,900 feet. I should also mention that this ride has 0 inversions, meaning you never go upside down during the entire duration of the ride. And as a fun fact, there is a switch track that starts the entire experience. So now that we know quite a bit about the stats of this ride, let's figure out how to get there. Icebreaker is located in its own kind of wild Arctic section, which did change up a lot of that area, but to get there, from the front entrance, you're going to make a right before encountering the main entrance sign to the park and passing by Coaster Coffee Co., which will end up being on your left. From that point on, you'll keep walking down that pathway past the Dolphin Nursery, as well as a couple of restaurants, including the Flamecraft Bar, as well as the Seafire Grill, which will end up being on your right. And from that point, you'll reach the main central lake in the middle of the park and make a right towards the bridge. This bridge will take you straight towards Icebreaker. You'll get some amazing views of the ride from here, as well as some spectacular views across the park all the way towards Mako, as well as Kraken. But once you exit off of the bridge, you'll make another right-hand turn and Icebreaker will be right there. And you will see its bright orange and blue color scheme pretty easily alongside the brand new Altitude Burgers and Glacier Bar, rounding out the entire section of the park. From this point, make sure to head to the lockers, which will be just on the right-hand side of the entrance, as you will need to purchase one in order to house any items that you have, including bags, fanny packs, and anything that can't fit inside a pocket. And just to let you know, if you do have sunglasses on without straps, they got more and more strict every ride we had with making sure those were in a locker especially. Now that you've got all your stuff in a locker, you can officially head in the queue, where you'll be greeted with a cool entry sign overhead, as well as some glaciers popping out of the ground, and the quick queue entrance on the right and the regular queue on the left. It is at this point you'll see a test seat in between those 2 lines splitting, so if you're not sure you'll be comfy and safe on this ride, make sure to sit down and check yourself to see if Icebreaker might be the right experience for you. Passing by the test seat though, through the standard queue, you'll be greeted with plenty of switchbacks, which are all underneath a brilliant roof that will keep you from melting in those hot Florida days. Within the queue is light theming showing off an Arctic expedition, as well as plenty of facts about animals and climate change. So don't worry, there's plenty of things to look at, as well as plenty of information to gather from just being in this queue. While you're in these switchbacks, there are a couple of TVs overhead showing you what the ride experience is going to be like, as well as the boarding process, just to get you ready for your ride on Icebreaker. Speaking of which, at this point you'll head up a little set of stairs into the station and be seated from row 1 all the way back to 9, and take a seat and buckle in before you officially break the ice. Icebreaker, being a Premier Rides roller coaster, is incredibly similar in train design as well as seat design as other rides such as Tigris, Electric Eel, and West Coast Racers if you've been to Florida or California respectively. You'd also know by going on full throttle at Six Flags Magic Mountain that these seats are quite snug to try and get in and out of, as there is quite a large lap bar as well as shin guard on these restraints that don't give too much room when you're getting in in and out of the seat. From this point, you'll also notice the comfort collar that does attach with a buckle at the top of this lap bar that you will need to put over your head during the experience, which does make it a little more complicated too. But realistically, this is just to ensure that there is no seat belt that's needed underneath the lap bar, and it makes the whole checking process a lot easier. From this point, you'll end up being seated nice and snug in kind of what I like to call a racing seat, as it does remind me of seats that you might see on an F1 car or potentially a NASCAR, as it encloses all around you, especially on the legs. From this point on, you're gonna pull down that lap bar, make sure it's nice and snug, and it will be nice and snug, and have that comfort collar go over your head and latch onto the buckle in front of you. Do be prepared if you're on the shorter side of things. This comfort collar might be kind of loose and move around quite a lot and potentially smack you upside the head, so do keep that in mind. But with all that said, it's now officially time to break the ice, so let's get onto that switch track and launch 4 separate times. The beginning of your icebreaker experience starts with a slow roll forward out of the station before you stop in the middle of what is a switch track. This switch track will move you toward the right-hand side as it does separate from the track you were just attached to. Eventually, once the sideways motion has come to a halt, this is when you'll start to launch backwards. Now, this launch isn't anything crazy or anything, it just gets you going, and I can promise you it's probably the tamest moment of the ride. Once you're off of that launch section, you'll kind of be brought up in what won't be a little bit of airtime before kind of going about a quarter way up that backwards beyond vertical spike. Then you'll start to head back down, diving back into the launch section, launching forward. This is when things start to get a little bit more intense, as you actually feel propelled on this launch compared to the first. And then you'll reach the camera spot, which makes sure to pose on both times you launch because pictures will be taken on different sides on different launches. So I think that's a really cool aspect of this ride, but they will be on both sides of the train. And then you will start to pop up a little bit on this tiny little hill. Now, this is where it starts to get even crazier, as you will feature some airtime. Now, this airtime is incredibly quick and just pops you out of your seat before slamming you back down. And while this first real moment of airtime isn't anything to write home about, it is just a precursor for what's to come. From this point on, you start to go up that top hat about halfway before coming back downward, and this is where it starts to really bridge into that thrill category pretty easily. This backwards moment of airtime over that little bunny hill that I mentioned just a second ago is kind of disorienting. And if you aren't expecting airtime there, it can be quite surprising, but it's not the most intense part of the ride, I can definitely assure you that. From this point though, you have another launch, the third of the ride, which pushes you back, and I mean actually propels you backward in a way that you might seem to go, oh, that's a lot, and then popping back into that airtime hill over the pathway. This is where the ride really breaks into the thrill. This moment is just pretty crazy on its own, with some backwards airtime to the point where I was completely shocked every ride I got on this coaster, and the moment almost reminded me a little bit of Montezuma's Revenge's loop going backwards through it, which is kind of weird to think about. Immediately after this airtime moment though, you will be slammed back down into your seat and going up that 100-degree backwards spike, which is a fantastic moment. It gives you a great view of the surrounding area and some cool weightlessness feeling, but immediately after that airtime hill could be potentially a little bit much for some of the younger riders. Of course though, you have about 2 seconds to think about that backwards spike before going back down it and hitting that airtime hill yet again, where it really starts to kick in like crazy. If you've been on Mako at the park, you know that airtime is very floater-like. It pushes you gently out of your seat like you're flying on a cloud before gently placing you back down. Icebreaker has straight up ejector airtime, and that's what we call it in the community because it literally feels like an ejector seat out of a fighter jet. It pushes you out of your seat very quickly and very violently before ripping you back down as quick as possible. And Icebreaker is the perfect study for that type of moment. You don't have time to think about it though, because you're getting launched into that fourth launch immediately and going back back into the other airtime hill, which this is probably the most intense part of the ride, as it really does punch you up into the sky and back down immediately. Now, I won't lie, this is where the seats definitely hinder the ride for me a little bit. I was feeling a little bit in pain, especially after 3 consecutive rides with these airtime moments in specific. They pushed you right up into that lap bar and shin guard, and potentially the over-the-shoulder comfort collars in not the most comfortable way. But if you're looking for pure airtime and pure thrill, this moment is actually really, really cool. Immediately following it though, you'll go up that 80-foot tall top hat and get a beautiful view of the surrounding area for just a couple of seconds before heading down nearly vertical towards the ground again. This, if you're towards the back, will give you some fantastic airtime, similar to that airtime pop I just mentioned previously, although that previous airtime moment is the strongest in the front for sure. But I can't lie, at this point this ride feels like 2 different coasters in one. The first half has now officially ended after the top hat, and to me the most comparable ride I can think of to the first portion is something like Tigris or Electric Eel, the premier Skyrocket 2 models, going back and forth with semi-forceful launches and getting some crazy ejector airtime at a couple of points with a little bit of positive G's, obviously not as many as the Skyrocket 2s, but the first half definitely screams that ride for me. Now, the second half feels more like a Manta at SeaWorld San Diego, or even a wave breaker type of ride at SeaWorld San Antonio. It's definitely a lot more tame, a lot more graceful, has some really crazy moments, don't get me wrong, but it definitely feels like a different coaster altogether. From this point though, you take a sharp banked right turn next to the ground, which looks really cool as the car is still running at its top speed. Following this though is one of the most violent ejector moments on the ride, including the double down portion over the walkway right there. I gotta say, this is another moment that is definitely pretty crazy, as you get 2 sharp airtime moments back to back, and this was another one of those moments that caught me off guard every single time. Following this, you twist toward the right into the Sidewinder element, which is kind of like an inversion, but it doesn't fully invert, as it overbanks all the way up to one of the highest points of the ride. I have to mention, this is one of the more interesting parts of the ride for me personally, as by the top you whip towards the left, giving a cool bit of lateral motion, but do be prepared for that comfort collar if you are on the shorter side, of course, at that part, before leveling out towards the ground again and twisting sharply to the right in kind of a miniature wave turn, which is a cool moment of sideways motion, as well as getting a different perspective on things. From this point, the ride definitely tames down a heck of a lot as it twists towards the left and then towards the right, with maybe a little bit of airtime in there, not really much though, before coming right underneath the top hat, as well as going right alongside that launch section and giving you one last strong airtime moment right before you pop up into that brake run. From the brake run, you'll come to a complete stop, turn 180 degrees around, back into the station, and your ride on Icebreaker was now officially anything but chill. From this point, you're going to get out of the Restraint as well as the seat and head down that exit ramp and go underneath parts of the launch track, as well as underneath the brake run too. On the left hand side as you exit, there will be a small gift shop, as well as where you can grab your photos, and of course head back toward the right to the stuff in your locker. After your ride though, I gotta ask, are you going for another, or are you going for one of those altitude burgers? So we've made it to my personal thoughts and opinions on the ride. You heard a couple of them prior. Now, I won't lie, this ride was definitely marketed as a family/family thrill type of coaster at the park. And it definitely might seem that way on paper with the lower height and speed, as well as seating position in comparison to things like Kraken, Manta, and Mako at the park. But to be honest, the hashtag anything but chill campaign is very true. This ride is not really meant for families. It is pretty intense, and I cannot lie, some of the kids that I saw riding the ride were like, whoa, that was too much. And I can definitely understand why. Compared to Grover's Boxcar Derby at the park, this is the next coaster in the lineup, and it is pretty extreme compared to that. And obviously, it's not a 200-foot tall hypercoaster or a 7 inversion floorless coaster or, of course, a crazy flying coaster. But it sure as heck isn't like Wavebreaker or a Manta at SeaWorld San Diego or even a Cobra's Curse at Busch Gardens Tampa. This thing in my mind is a thrill coaster through and through, so make sure you have that ready in your mind going into this coaster, because I know there was a lot of people thinking it was going to be a heck of a lot tamer than it actually is. I also feel like I need to bring this up after 3 rides. This was after 3 rides, I will admit, 12 full launches forwards and backwards. I did start to feel a little nauseous. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that's a completely normal feeling, but for me personally, I have not gotten nauseous on a coaster in probably over a decade. And I think a big reason for that is because of that final backwards launch, as well as the airtime moment and that reverse spike. All of that within about 2 or 3 seconds is quite a lot for the body to handle, especially backwards and forwards. So do keep that in mind as well. If you're not okay with motion sickness going backwards and forwards consistently, this ride also might not be for you. I promise I'm not trying to talk bad about the ride at all. I'm actually really fond of the coaster itself. I just want to make sure you guys know exactly what you're getting into, because I noticed when I was at the park, almost everybody that was riding was completely shocked at what they got. Another aspect of the ride, though, that I have to bring up again is that airtime. There is plenty of it. If you love airtime, this thing is going to be one of your favorites in the park. Don't get me wrong. I've heard people compare it to Mako in the park even, which is pretty crazy to think about. But if you're not as into airtime as others, I can totally understand not exactly enjoying this ride as much. And don't get me wrong, this thing is fantastic for it, but because of the restraint system, it can get a little painful on repeat rides especially. All right, that's enough of me blathering on about, little things you should be thinking about before taking on Icebreaker. Here are my actual thoughts. This thing is a heck of a lot of fun. It gets really intense, don't get me wrong, but it still has its calmer moments. The launches are great. While I do think maybe a little repetitive, if it was 3 launches, I think I probably would have liked it just a little bit more. And I can definitely say I would have preferred some of the moments not featuring airtime, as it did start to get into that Steel Vengeance finale type of experience with going up and down and up and down and up and down again, back to back to back to back to back. I gotta say though, that reverse spike is really cool. The top hat is really good as well, and I really enjoyed the second half of the layout, as it really packed in the variety with airtime, lateral forces, and even a little bit of positives going in and out of that Sidewinder. But I can't help but feel this ride feels like 2 different coasters combined. In terms of least and most favorite seat, I'm not entirely sure, as most of my rides were towards the middle of the train. Although I can definitely say if you want some extreme airtime, definitely go towards the front. And in terms of least and most favorite element on the coaster, this is where I'm kind of split on a couple of options. I think my least favorite moment is probably that first launch backwards in that whole section right there, or even heading back toward the brake run. Now, in terms of favorite, I might even say that double down into the Sidewinder or that final launch. Honestly, I think that double down in the Sidewinder is a little more interesting, as it does get quite variable compared to the launching back and forth, but there are still a lot of fantastic moments on this ride. So with all of that said and put down in paper, let's head to my ratings, which, if you haven't seen the other reviews, they are a little unorthodox. First, I'm going to give a ski slope rating of how experienced of a coaster rider you should be before taking out Icebreaker, and then, of course, a 5-star rating for intensity and fun. And at the final, we'll bring in my personal score out of 10. So on the ski slope rating, I'm kind of split between intermediate and experienced riders, so like a blue square versus a black diamond. And the more and more I talk about it, I would actually probably edge toward the black diamond, adding into the facts that you are going backwards and forwards repeatedly, and the airtime is incredibly forceful. In terms of intensity though, I'm gonna go with a 3-star rating out of 5. It is quite intense, especially in terms of negative G's. And while sure it's not as traditionally intense as something like Manta or of course Mako or Kraken 2. I would definitely say it's more intense than Journey to Atlantis for sure, and I would argue Journey to Atlantis is the only family coaster in the park. And heck, most of that ride is literally a boat ride. Heading into the fun factor, I'm gonna say this is between 3 and 4 stars, as most of it is quite fun, but some parts are a little lacking, I would say. And out of 10, I gotta give this a 7. So there you have it, all my thoughts on Icebreaker, the brand new roller coaster at SeaWorld Orlando. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, while you're down there, make sure to go check out all the links in the description, including Parks Bros pins, the Discord, Instagram, and even TikTok. But I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this review, as it does take quite a lot of work, just like all of the reviews. And if you want to see more, make sure to go check them out in the playlists linked right now. So again, I must say thank you all so much for watching. It really does mean a heck of a lot. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so. We've got tons of content coming, especially more reviews. But until then, we'll see you on the next ride.